reasons, but I'll focus on two in this lecture. First, there are many types of bacteria that require a host to survive, and that is most definitely true for language as well. And second, bacteria range from general purpose to extremely specialized. Many types of bacteria can survive in a wide range of environments, but there are also types of bacteria that have evolved and adapted themselves to very particular niches. In these specific environments, the bacteria thrive. Outside of them, they die. We can think of language in a similar way. According to Morton Christensen and Nick Chater's theory of language evolution, language evolved from a general form of communication that is shared across many different species. But because the human mind is such a unique environment, this general communication adapted to become highly specialized for us, resulting in what we now call language. The end result is that because language is specialized and adapted for our minds, and our minds only, you can't just take it out of humans and expect it to survive in another species. Language needs us as much as we need it. In order to understand how language is uniquely sculpted to the human mind, we must use the 3D framework to explore the biological, psychological, and social prerequisites that make humans the perfect fit for language. In this lecture, we'll explore the psychological and social commonalities and differences in communication and cognition between humans and non-humans. And then in the next lecture, we'll dive deeper into investigate the biological foundations of language. The first place to look for commonalities and differences is in the natural communication systems of non-human species in the wild. Modern research in the study of animal behavior has greatly benefited from methodological advances in audio, video, and computer technologies, and we now know more about non-human communication than ever before. Let's start with a species that is very far away from humans on the phylogenetic tree: honeybees. Bees have a very impressive communication system for letting other bees know about the location of food sources, such as flower nectar. When a worker bee finds a food source, it rushes back to the hive and performs an elaborate bee dance on the surface of the honeycomb. This dance communicates information about the direction, distance, and quality of the food source. As Carl von Frisch demonstrated in 1965, each of these three components is captured in a different part of the dance. Direction of the food source is indicated by the direction of the dance. If the bee heads towards the top of the honeycomb, that indicates the source can be found by heading straight towards the sun. Any horizontal deviation from that vertical movement indicates the angle away from the sun that the other bees should fly. The distance to the source is captured by how long the bee dances in one particular direction. The longer the bee moves in that direction, the farther the source. And the quality of the source is communicated by the intensity of the dance. As the bee moves along the path, it shakes its body. The more vigorously it shakes, the better the quality of the food source. This is really very impressive. It shows that bees are capable of creating new utterances using a set of basic rules, rather than just mimicking things they have seen before. Moreover, it appears somewhat symbolic in that certain parts of the dance map onto specific things. However, the dance of bees and the language of humans differ in some significant ways. For one, the bee dance is an innately specified system that is not learned by observing others. For example, bees are born with dialectical differences that vary according to when they use their unique waggle dance to indicate distant food sources. Interestingly, if a member of one bee species with a slightly different dialect of dance is introduced to a new group, it will not learn the new dance, but instead will produce the one it was born with. 2. The elements of the dance may not be truly symbolic in the same way as human language. The direction, path, and intensity of the dance map onto the location and quality of the food source in a non-arbitrary way. There are many ways to say head for the sun in human languages or all around the world, but with the bee dance, the only way to say it is to orient the body towards the sun. And finally, bees dance only about food and water. For example, they don't return to the hive and comment about other things like the location of predators. This suggests that the function of their dance is fixed and narrow. All right, maybe bees are just too far away from humans on the evolutionary tree. What if we move to a branch closer to home? What about primate communication? One of the classic studies on primate vocal communication was done with vervet monkeys by Seyfarth, Cheney, and Marlar in 1980. Vervet monkeys are small, gray-haired monkeys that live in groups in woodland and mountain areas in East Africa. They have 3 primary predators: leopards, eagles, and pythons. These predators are so dangerous that vervet monkeys have developed vocal alarms that let the rest of the group know their presence. This by itself may not be too impressive. After all, many species have general alarm calls. But what makes vervet monkey calls so special is that they are specific to the 3 types of predator. According to Seyfarth, Cheney, and Marlar, leopard alarms are short tonal calls typically produced in a series on both exhalation and inhalation. Eagle alarms are a series of low-pitched staccato grunts. And snake alarms are high-pitched chutters or shrieks. To test if these calls had different semantic content, the researchers visited the natural habitat of vervets in Kenya and played audio recordings of the 3 calls when there were no predators around. And then they observed the behavior of the monkeys in the group. Their results were clear. Leopard alarms caused monkeys to run for cover in the trees. Eagle alarms caused them to run for cover in the rocks or low bushes. And snake alarms caused them to search the ground all around them. Moreover, follow-up studies showed that this skill was not entirely innate. It had to be learned through practice. Baby vervets learned how to make the appropriate calls by observing adult monkeys produce these calls. Interestingly, baby vervets' initial calls were not very precise. For example, they gave eagle alarms to other types of birds than eagles, and python alarms to other types of snakes, too. This should sound familiar. Just like human language, there appears to be a semantic system of symbols, alarm calls, mapping onto reference, predators, or an escape strategy. A close analysis of the acoustics of the sounds suggests that these mappings are quite arbitrary. There doesn't seem to be anything in the alarms that captures the meaning of the referent. This arbitrary mapping is a key linguistic universal. Also note that the learning of the specific sounds is very similar to Hackett's traditional transmission feature of language. Unlike bees that are born with a fully formed understanding of the bee dance, vervets require extended practice to learn how to correctly use their calls. Now, this behavior of vervets is pretty impressive, but you might be wondering how truly intentional it is. After all, these calls could just be a sort of automatic alarm that never really has other monkeys in mind. In other words, are these vocalizations a form of deliberate communication? Shifting to a different primate species and a different form of communication provides some clues. Chimpanzees in the wild communicate not only with vocalizations, but with hand gestures too. The pioneering primatologist Jane Goodall was one of the first scientists to document that chimps produce various types of bodily gestures when interacting with other chimps. Some of the early gestures that Goodall identified were groom me and pickup gestures, but in recent years, the repertoire has grown substantially. In one of the largest scale studies done in the wild, Catherine Hobader and Richard Byrne recorded over 4,500 gestures produced by the Sonso community of chimpanzees from the Budongo forest in Uganda. These gestures were produced by dozens of chimpanzees, both adults and children, and there were over 60 distinct meanings recorded. Some of the most common functions of the gestures were attracting sexual attention, communicating stop, directing attention, initiating play, and even making invitations to travel. Many of these gestures were used in a similar way by the whole community. For example, tearing leaves with the teeth, or clipping, was used as a sexual advance, but some gestures had multiple meanings. Scratching the chest could mean "come travel with me" or "groom me." The most striking thing about these gestures, compared to vertical gestures, is that they appeared quite deliberate. In most cases, eye contact was made between the sender and the recipient. And if a recipient looked away, the sender would wait to get the recipient's attention before repeating the gesture. Finally, I just want to say a few things about some recent discoveries in elephants. Like vervet monkeys, elephants produce different vocalizations to warn fellow elephants of predators, including one from the trunk that is a low and soft rumbling alarm specifically for human hunters. Impressively, this alarm is more than just a reflexive call to run. It's a signal to coordinate group actions to mount a defense against the hunters. This suggests that the message is deliberate and intentional. So it appears that other animals, such as chimps and elephants, can use arbitrary symbols to deliberately communicate meanings with other members of the species. However, it's worth pointing out an aspect of this sort of non-human communication that is different from language. There's very little evidence that primates and elephants naturally string together more than one or two calls or gestures in rule-governed ways to produce novel sentences. Recall that rule-governedness and generativity are hallmarks of human language, so their absence is significant. Is there any evidence that another species can handle this sort of thing? The answer may come from a species that takes us to yet another branch of the phylogenetic tree, songbirds. Even though songbirds evolutionarily diverged from our ancient ancestors some 300 million years ago, songbird communication shares an uncanny resemblance to many aspects of human language. For one, as Darwin noted, songbirds are one of the few other species that learn their communication system almost entirely through experience. In fact, even within the same species of songbird, there are important dialects that must be mastered to communicate with members in the same geographical region. Baby songbirds even go through a stage of babbling in practicing the songs they are exposed to by adults.